The sun rose over the serene city of Haven, the capital of New Providence, a tranquil world. Lush green forests covered the towering mountains and shimmering blue rivers snaked through broad valleys. The air was fresh, and the sky, though unfamiliar, offered a peaceful view. Around 12 million humans lived on this planet, far away from Earth, creating a community that thrived. Farms, schools, and hospitals dotted the landscape, and the laughter of children echoed in the parks, while parents worked to maintain a calm existence. It was an ideal life, far removed from the chaos that often consumed Earth. Commander Sarah Chun stood alone on the balcony of the defense headquarters, sipping her morning coffee. At 34, her black hair was cropped short, and her tired eyes reflected years of duty. She had been with the Colonial Defense Force for over a decade, though her work here on New Providence had always been uneventful. The biggest emergency she dealt with in the past 2 years was a small forest fire. The commander had often joked with her team that her job was the most uneventful in the galaxy, but all of that would change at 9:47 a.m. The shrill sound of the alarm cut through the calm. The peace was shattered as it echoed throughout the city, sending everyone into a frenzy. Sarah quickly dropped her coffee and sprinted toward the command center. Officers scrambled, shouting and pointing at the large screens that lined the walls. Pushing through the chaos, Sarah reached the center and gazed at the main display. Her heart froze. Above New Providence, 40 enormous ships loomed in orbit. These ships were unlike anything humanity had encountered before. Massive, their hulls were a dark purple, adorned with strange symbols and markings that no one could identify. They were unlike any ship design documented by human records. They had appeared from nowhere, emerging suddenly out of hyperspace without warning or any sign of communication. "What are they?" Sarah demanded, her voice firm but shaking with the first seeds of panic. "Unknown, Commander," one of the officers stammered. "We've tried every communication channel, every language. They're not responding." The alien ships moved with eerie precision, aligning into a perfect formation that covered the entire planet, leaving Sarah no illusion about their intentions. The training scenarios she had practiced for first contact seemed trivial now. These ships were not here for peaceful negotiations. They were here for something else, something far more sinister. "Activate planetary shields," Sarah ordered immediately. "Get me aligned to Earth, now." The thin blue energy barrier flickered to life around New Providence's major cities. It wasn't much, just a defense against smaller threats like asteroids or radiation. It was never designed to withstand an invasion, not like this. At 10:15, the first plasma bolt struck. It hit with the force of a nuclear explosion, slamming into the planetary shield above Haven. The barrier held for mere seconds before it shattered like glass. The bolt continued its deadly descent, slamming into the eastern district below. The impact left nothing in its wake but death. 20,000 people were vaporized in that one moment. Buildings, homes, and streets melted into nothingness, leaving only rivers of molten glass. Sarah's legs weakened beneath her, but she forced herself to move. She crawled to the communications console, blood streaming from a gash on her forehead. "Earth! Earth! This is New Providence. We are under attack. Repeat, we are under attack by unknown alien forces. 40 warships. They are bombarding the planet." Another bolt struck, the sky now ablaze with orange flames. The ground trembled violently, knocking Sarah to the floor. She could see Haven burning from the shattered windows, its towering buildings collapsing, its streets turning to ash. Panic and chaos filled the streets as people ran, screaming. On the bridge of the lead alien ship, Admiral Ketharum, a reptilian volante, stared down at the devastation with cold, calculating eyes. The volante had ruled the galaxy for 30,000 years, and they had always followed the same brutal policy: eliminate potential threats before they could grow too powerful. Humans, it seemed, were one of those potential threats. Status report. Ketharum demanded in his deep, hissing voice. "Planetary defenses are failing. We estimate the complete sterilization of the colony in approximately 6 hours." "Acceptable," Ketharum responded indifferently. "Continue bombardment." As Sarah watched the world around her crumble, she felt a wave of hopelessness, but something deep within her refused to give in. She had to warn Earth, even if it cost her everything. But in the midst of the destruction, one small glimmer of hope remained. A single drone, carrying the last chance to send a message to Earth, was on its way. Would it reach its destination before all was lost? As the relentless barrage of plasma bolts continued to rain down from the alien warships, the landscape of New Providence became unrecognizable. The once beautiful world, filled with life and promise, now burned under the brutal assault. Sarah's heart raced as she dragged herself across the rubble, blood dripping from her forehead. The building around her had collapsed, fire spreading quickly. Her officers were either dead or unconscious, and the command center was a disaster. She couldn't stop. She couldn't let it end like this. Gritting her teeth, Sarah found one remaining console that still functioned. She pulled herself up, feeling the strain in every movement. Her hands were trembling, but she pressed on. She had one chance, one final shot at saving humanity from complete devastation. The courier drone, it had to be launched. With bloody fingers, she worked the controls, her mind focused solely on the task at hand. The drone was a small, autonomous device designed to carry vital information across vast distances, beyond the reach of enemy forces. It would be their only hope of reaching Earth, of ensuring that humanity knew what had happened here and what these merciless invaders had done. Her vision blurred from pain, but she didn't care. The drone had to be launched before it was too late. Come on, Sarah muttered under her breath, staring at the progress bar on the screen. The upload of sensor data, footage of the alien ships, recordings of the brutal attack, it was all there. Every piece of information Earth needed to understand the gravity of the situation. Every piece of evidence that could help them fight back. The upload completed. She exhaled sharply, a brief moment of relief. Her fingers shook as she hit the final command to launch the drone. The small metallic device detached from its cradle and shot up into the atmosphere, breaking through the clouds and heading toward space. Sarah watched as it disappeared into the void, a small but vital victory amidst the destruction. But her moment of triumph was short-lived. Another massive plasma bolt struck the command center, this time hitting directly above her. The ground cracked beneath her feet, and she felt herself being thrown forward as the world exploded around her. The force of the blast sent her flying across the room, slamming into a wall. Pain coursed through her body, but she pushed it aside. She had done it. She had sent the message, but now it was over. With the last of her strength, Sarah crawled to a window and looked out at the devastation. The sky was thick with smoke, the flames of her city licking at the heavens. The once thriving New Providence was now nothing but a charred ruin. She knew she wouldn't make it out alive. The bombardment had already destroyed so much. There was no way to survive this. But she had to make sure that Earth knew. She had to make sure they would be ready when the Volante came for them next. With the last labored breath, Sarah reached for the communication system. She spoke her last words, her voice barely audible, as she whispered into the mic. "Tell Earth, tell them everything, and make them pay." With that, the room fell silent. The last transmission from New Providence faded into the ether, leaving behind nothing but the ashes of a world that had once held so much promise. And somewhere in the vast expanse of space, the small courier drone continued its journey, carrying the hope of humanity's survival. Would Earth receive the message in time? Would they understand the gravity of the threat that now loomed over them? 6 hours passed since the devastation of New Providence. The bombardment stopped, leaving nothing but silence and a planet consumed by fire. Admiral Cathorum stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching as his fleet turned away from the dying world. To him, it was just another victory, another cleansing of the galaxy to maintain the supremacy of the Volante Dominion. "Purification complete," his second officer reported flatly, a hint of satisfaction in his voice. Cathorum didn't respond immediately. His yellow eyes scanned the monitor, showing the results of the attack. New Providence reduced to molten glass, no signs of life remaining. Yet, as he stared, something in him, something buried deep within, stirred. He had done his duty. The Volante had never failed to eliminate a potential threat. The humans were weak, their civilization barely a flicker compared to the ancient Dominion. But as the fleet disappeared into hyperspace, Cathorum couldn't shake a nagging feeling. It wasn't fear, he wasn't afraid, but a growing sense of uncertainty. What would these humans do next? He couldn't help but wonder. On Earth, it took just over 2 weeks for the courier drone to arrive. The moment it dropped out of hyperspace near Earth's defenses, it was detected by the planet's surveillance systems. The United Earth Council had been on high alert ever since the attack on New Providence, but no one expected this. The drone was brought immediately to a secure facility in Geneva, deep beneath the city. The council members, leaders of Earth's remaining powers, gathered in a dimly lit bunker, their faces grim and worn. President General Marcus Webb, an aging but resolute man, stood at the head of the room. His face, weathered from years of conflict, showed no hint of the terror or grief he must have felt. He had seen the worst that humanity could endure, but nothing prepared him for what was about to unfold. The drone's contents were quickly uploaded to the main display. The room fell silent as the first images appeared on the screen. The lush forests of New Providence, gone. The once bustling city of Haven, destroyed. People running through streets that had turned to ash. A voice crackled from the speakers, Sarah Chun's last message echoing through the room. "Tell Earth, tell them everything, and make them pay." The images continued, a harrowing account of the slaughter. The council members watched in stunned silence, unable to process the scale of the destruction. President Webb's jaw clenched as the final transmission faded. The weight of the loss hung heavily in the room. There were no words. No one knew how to react to this level of devastation. Webb stood motionless for a long time, his hands clenched tightly at his sides. When he finally spoke, his voice was low but steady, carrying a cold, calculated resolve. "Find out who they are, and then we will make them pay." The words were simple, but the intent behind them was clear. A promise had been made. Earth would avenge New Providence. The time for mourning was over. The time for action had come. Behind the scenes, humanity began to change. The United Earth Council quickly dissolved all pre-existing national borders and political divisions. The time for old rivalries and politics was over. There would be no more debates, no more compromises. Humanity had a common enemy now, and nothing mattered. The United Earth Command was born. Within hours, every military asset on Earth was mobilized. Weapons production was ramped up to unprecedented levels. Factories, once devoted to consumer goods, were now building warships and military hardware. The moon was transformed into a massive construction platform, and Mars became a training ground for the new army that would rise from the ashes of their fallen world. Earth was no longer a divided planet. It was a single, united force, and its sole purpose was clear: revenge. Dr. Yuki Tanaka, a brilliant physicist and one of the leading experts in weaponry, was among the first to take action. She had lost her brother in the attack, and the pain of that loss fueled her work. For 3 years, she and her team analyzed the data sent by Sarah Chun's courier drone, studying the alien weapons and technology. The Volante had believed they were untouchable, their weapons superior to anything humanity could build. But Dr. Tanaka was determined to prove them wrong. "We will show them what humans can do with the gifts they gave us,"
she said to her team as they worked tirelessly to reverse engineer the alien technology. By the time the final calculations were made, Earth's prototype weapons were 30% more powerful than the Volante plasma cannons. Humanity had taken the Volante's technology and improved upon it. The weapons they created were more advanced, more efficient, and more deadly than anything the alien invaders had ever seen. With Earth now preparing for war, the human fleet began its journey towards vengeance. The galaxy would soon learn that humanity was not to be underestimated. But there was one question that remained unanswered. Would the Volante Dominion be ready for what was coming next?
While Earth's preparations for war escalated, a new generation of humans was rising on the 16 remaining colonies. They had grown up in the aftermath of the attack on New Providence, their entire lives defined by the trauma and the promise of retribution. In the schools, history lessons included not just mathematics and science, but the names of the 12 million people who had died in a single day. Every child learned about the massacre, and they carried those names in their hearts like a vow. Chinuen had been only 15 when New Providence burned. His older sister, Sarah Chun, had been the commander on the planet's defense force, and he had idolized her. He joined the military soon after the attack, determined to follow in her footsteps. But what he found was a new reality, one that wasn't focused on peacekeeping or protection, but on preparing for war. By the time he was 25, Chinuen had risen through the ranks faster than anyone could have imagined. His mind was sharp and his focus unyielding. He studied every conflict humanity had ever fought, analyzing alien strategies, calculating weaknesses. When the United Earth Command established the role of Supreme Commander for the Retribution Fleet, Chinuen was the only choice. "You understand what we are building, don't you?" President General Marcus Webb asked him on the day of his appointment. "Yes, sir," Chinuen replied, his voice steady. "We are building an answer. We are building 500,000 answers." Webb nodded approvingly. "Can you command them?" Chinuen's thoughts drifted to the memories of his sister, the way she had smiled while drinking her morning coffee, the peaceful innocence she had known just moments before her world had turned to ash. His jaw tightened as he thought of her, and then of the 12 million others who never had a chance to fight back. "I can command them," he said, his voice full of determination, "and I will make sure every ship knows exactly why we are going." In the hidden shipyards of Earth, the construction of humanity's fleet was underway. Engineers worked in secrecy, designing ships that were more advanced than anything the galaxy had seen. They had learned from the Volante's technology, but they had improved it. Reactors that generated 10 times more power, hulls that could withstand unimaginable forces, weapons that could shred the Volante's plasma shields with ease, and most importantly, they had created a fleet that no one had thought possible. 500,000 warships, each one designed for one purpose: to exact revenge on the species that had destroyed New Providence. The Volante Dominion, for all its technological superiority, only had 80,000 ships in its fleet. For 30,000 years, this had been enough, but now humanity had 5 times that number. And these weren't small patrol vessels. These were dreadnoughts, battle cruisers, heavy assault carriers, each ship a powerhouse capable of taking on the entire Volante fleet and winning. By 2355, the fleet was ready. The silent decade of preparation, of building, of waiting for the moment to strike had come to an end. Chinuen stood on the bridge of the Remembrance, the largest warship ever built by humanity, as it prepared to lead the 500,000 ships out of Earth's orbit. His officers, his crew, every one of them knew the mission. "We're ready, Commander," his communications officer reported, his voice steady. Chinuen looked out at the fleet, spread across the stars like a swarm of metal giants.
Each ship was a symbol of humanity's will to survive, to fight back, to never forget the horrors they had endured. A collective spirit of revenge burned in their hearts, but Chynouan knew this was more than that. This was justice. This was a reckoning. "All ships report ready," the officer repeated, a tinge of pride in his voice. "Set course for Volante space," Chynouan ordered, his voice calm but filled with the weight of history. "Engage hyperspace drives." The ships around Earth's orbit activated their drives simultaneously. As they moved into hyperspace, a light filled the space surrounding Earth, a blinding flash as 500,000 warships vanished into the vast unknown, heading toward the stars, towards the Volante Dominion. The human fleet surged forward through hyperspace, a deadly force in pursuit of those who had dared to wipe out an entire colony. But the Volante Dominion had no idea what was coming. The battle for revenge was about to begin, and the galaxy would tremble in its wake.
Station Commander Vethener had never expected to see real combat. He had served at Nexus 7, a border patrol station for the Volante Dominion, for 15 years without incident. Most days were spent collecting taxes from merchant ships, checking documentation from minor species passing through Dominion space, and maintaining the peace. The Volante Dominion had ruled its region of the galaxy for 30,000 years, and no one dared challenge them. Vethener's job was simple: ensure no one trespassed and keep the status quo. He had grown accustomed to the quiet, to the dull rhythm of life in the Dominion's borderlands, but today was different. The alarms blared suddenly, ripping him from his desk, his usual routine shattered in an instant. "Commander, hyperspace signatures," his sensor officer screamed. His voice was filled with panic. "Multiple contacts!" Vethener froze. He had never seen his crew members so unsettled. He quickly crossed the room to the sensor display, trying to make sense of the readings. "How many?" Vethener demanded, his voice calm but increasingly concerned. The officer's hands shook as he ran the diagnostic checks again, his eyes glued to the screen. He swallowed hard. "Commander, I think the sensors are malfunctioning." Vethener's brow furrowed. "Fix them." "I've run diagnostics 3 times. The sensors are working, but the count can't be right," the officer stammered, his voice betraying the panic that was taking over him. The numbers on the screen made no sense. According to the sensors, 500,000 hyperspace signatures were approaching. Vethener stood still for a moment, unable to process what he was seeing. His mind raced. "That's impossible," he muttered. "The entire Volante fleet only has 80,000 ships. No one could have 500,000 ships." He stared at the growing number of signatures on the display, each one signifying a new ship entering the system. The scale was incomprehensible. How could this be happening? He hadn't received any intelligence about such a large force moving toward them. As the first ships began to materialize from hyperspace, Vethener's stomach churned. They were massive, far larger than anything he had ever seen. The smallest ship was twice the size of his largest patrol vessel. The sleek, brutal designs of the human ships were unlike anything the Volante had ever encountered. They spread out across the system like a tidal wave of metal, blocking the stars and filling the space with the terrifying promise of violence. Vethener's heart sank. This wasn't a small skirmish. This wasn't a pirate fleet. This was an army, and it was coming for the Volante Dominion. "Open a channel," Vethener ordered, trying to regain some semblance of control. The communication system hummed to life, but there was a long, tense silence. Vethener felt the weight of the moment, his mind racing. Who were these ships? Where had they come from? And what did they want? Then the voice came through, clear and cold. "We are humanity," the voice said, the words translated automatically into Volante. "You burned New Providence. We have come to discuss this."
Vithaner's blood ran cold. His mind snapped back to the report from a decade ago, the human colony they had wiped out without hesitation. The report was clear. The humans were gone, eradicated, and yet here they were, alive, more powerful than ever, and demanding an explanation. His voice faltered as he responded. "This is Commander Vithaner of the Volante Dominion. You are trespassing in sovereign territory. Stand down and prepare for inspection, or you will be destroyed." The silence stretched out for what felt like eternity, the vast fleet of human ships surrounding him. Then the voice spoke again, its tone unwavering. "That is not going to happen." Vithaner's eyes widened in shock. He had expected resistance, of course, perhaps a show of force, but this was different. This was not the typical defiance of a minor species. The humans weren't afraid. They weren't retreating. They were coming for him, for the Dominion, and they had the power to back it up. Desperation clawed at Vithaner as he made the worst decision of his career. He activated the battle systems. "All ships, engage the enemy." His 12 patrol ships surged forward, charging toward the human fleet. Weapons powered up, shields activated, and the Volante ships moved as one toward their apparent doom. Vithaner watched as his ships moved into position. The Volante had never lost a battle before. The humans couldn't possibly stand against them. They were outnumbered, outgunned. The fight would be over in minutes. But something was wrong. The human fleet moved with terrifying precision. Their ships, though fewer in number, were coordinated in ways the Volante had never seen. They attacked from multiple angles, each ship working in unison with the others, their weapons tearing through Volante's shields like paper. The Volante ships, despite their size and strength, were outmatched at every turn. One by one, the Volante patrol ships were destroyed. Explosions rang out in space, debris scattering across the cold void. Vithaner watched helplessly as his fleet was obliterated in a matter of minutes. The human fleet didn't stop. It didn't hesitate. It moved with the cold, calculated efficiency of a force determined to make a statement. Vithaner's station, his home, was powerless to fight back. He could only watch as the final defenders fell, one after the other. When the battle was over, the communication channel opened again. "You have lost 12 ships and 600 crew members. We have lost nothing. Do you wish to continue this discussion, or would you like to contact your superiors?" Vithaner, now alone in the silence of his shattered station, realized the truth. The Volante Dominion, the mighty empire that had ruled the stars for millennia, had just been shown what true power looked like. The human fleet had made their point, one swift, decisive victory that shattered the Volante's sense of invincibility. What would the Volante Dominion do next? And what would humanity do now that they had the upper hand?
The news of the defeat at Nexus 7 spread quickly through the Volante Dominion. It was a blow so unexpected, so utterly humiliating, that for the first time in 30,000 years, the once mighty empire was shaken to its core. How could this be? How could a species they had wiped out in one swift strike return, not just alive, but stronger, more powerful than ever? The high command in the Dominion capital, Avar Prime, was thrown into chaos. The council chamber, usually a place of calm deliberation and meticulous planning, was now filled with panic. The Volante, long accustomed to ruling with iron-fisted authority, were confronted with an enemy unlike any they had faced before, a force that could strike faster, hit harder, and most disturbingly, didn't fear them. Admiral Caterham, the architect of the destruction of New Providence, had seen the human fleet's approach with cold, calculating eyes. Now he sat before the High Council, an aging figure whose once proud scales had begun to dull. He was still a powerful voice in the Dominion, but his confidence had been shattered. He had followed the ancient laws of the Volante, eliminate potential threats before they could grow, but never had he expected that the humans,
so easily eradicated years ago, would rise from their ashes like this. The High Hegemon, the supreme ruler of the Volante Dominion, stood at the head of the council, her sharp eyes piercing through the room, searching for answers. The entire council was now watching Caterham, waiting for his explanation. The silence stretched on, oppressive and suffocating. "Admiral," the High Hegemon said slowly, her voice tinged with both authority and uncertainty. "Explain to us how this is possible. How could a species we thought destroyed not only survive, but become a threat of this magnitude? How did they build an armada of 500,000 ships?" Caterham remained silent for a long moment. He had no answers, no explanations, only the crushing realization that the Volante had underestimated humanity, perhaps fatally so. "We were wrong," Caterham said, his voice low, filled with an emotion he had never shown before, regret. "The humans, they have done something I did not foresee. They have united, they have built, and they have come for us." The High Hegemon's gaze remained steady, but there was a flicker of doubt in her eyes. She had ruled for centuries, but this was unlike any threat the Volante had faced. The sheer scale of the human fleet was overwhelming. The Volante had always believed in the superiority of their military might, but now they were confronted with a force that had no intention of being intimidated. "We should attack them immediately," Admiral Caterham suggested, his voice gaining strength. "We can destroy them before they become any more of a threat. This is our chance to wipe them out once and for all." Another council member spoke up, her voice trembling with doubt. "Admiral, our fleet is outnumbered. We have 80,000 ships. The humans have 500,000. Their weapons appear far more advanced than ours. Even if we strike first, the odds are against us." Caterham's confidence wavered, but he quickly regained his composure. "We can still win. The Volante have never lost a battle. We are the most powerful empire in the galaxy. They will fall before us." But there was no enthusiasm in his voice. The Volante had never faced an adversary like this before, and the idea of an all-out war against such a massive fleet filled even the most seasoned commanders with doubt. Another voice spoke up, this one from a younger council member who had been silent until now. "Perhaps we should negotiate," she suggested softly, her voice hesitant but firm. "Offer resources, territory, anything to avoid further conflict. If we are truly facing an enemy this powerful, it may be wiser to seek peace rather than risk everything." The High Hegemon considered the suggestion for a moment, her mind racing. She had ruled the Dominion with absolute authority, but now she faced a reality she had never prepared for, an enemy who wasn't seeking territory or dominance, but had come for justice. Could they negotiate with a species that had already suffered so much? "No," Caterham growled, shaking his head. "We cannot give in to them. We cannot show weakness. We must stand firm. Our empire has lasted for 30,000 years. The humans are nothing. They cannot threaten us." The High Hegemon's gaze remained steady, but her expression was unreadable. She had ruled for centuries, but this was unlike any threat the Volante had faced. The sheer scale of the human fleet was overwhelming. The Volante had always believed in the superiority of their military might, but now they were confronted with a force that had no intention of being intimidated. "Perhaps the humans aren't just another minor species. Perhaps it is time we learned what they truly want." She turned to the council, her voice steady but filled with resolve. "We will not strike yet. We will offer them one chance to speak, to come to terms. If they refuse, then we will proceed with force. But for now, we will listen." The Volante Dominion, once a fearsome empire that crushed its enemies without hesitation, was now on the defensive. The time of conquest had passed. Now the galaxy would watch to see if the Volante could adapt to the rise of humanity, or if they would be crushed under the weight of their own arrogance.
The human fleet continued its relentless advance through Volante space,
a wall of metal and firepower that stretched across the stars. Each ship in the 500,000-strong armada was a symbol of humanity's resolve, a reminder to the galaxy of what had been lost and what was now being built in the name of justice. Admiral Chenowin, Supreme Commander of the Retribution Fleet, stood on the bridge of the Remembrance, staring out at the endless sea of warships surrounding him. It was a sight he had dreamed of for years, but now, as the reality of their journey set in, there was no sense of triumph, only the burning drive to fulfill a promise. He had vowed to his sister, Sarah, that he would make sure the sacrifice of New Providence would not be forgotten. They had come for justice. In the vast command center of the Remembrance, the atmosphere was tense, each officer focused on their respective duties. For the past decade, they had prepared for this moment, the moment when humanity would take vengeance for 12 million lives lost in an instant. The fleet had traversed countless light years, passing through asteroid fields and navigating gas giants, carefully avoiding detection until they had reached the outskirts of Volante-controlled space. "All ships report ready," said the communications officer, his voice steady but tinged with anticipation. "Good," Chenowin replied, his voice calm but resolute. "Set course for the heart of Volante space. We will reach the Dominion capital within 3 days. Keep the fleet on high alert." The fleet moved in unison, its immense size cutting a swath through the void. Despite the scale of the human armada, the Dominion had not yet taken any action. The Volante, for all their technological might, had hesitated, an opportunity that humanity had been quick to capitalize on. The shock of seeing the human fleet materialize out of nowhere, striking with such coordination and deadly precision, had rattled even the most battle-hardened Volante commanders. And so the humans pressed on, knowing that the time for mercy had passed. They were not here to conquer. They were not here to impose their will on the galaxy. They had come for one reason only, to ensure that what happened to New Providence would never happen again. Chenowin's mind wandered as he stood on the bridge, his eyes scanning the fleet. He thought about Sarah, her final message, the way her voice had echoed through the comms before it was silenced forever. "Tell Earth, tell them everything, and make them pay." He had sworn to carry that message forward, to make sure that the Volante would understand the true cost of their actions. He turned to his second-in-command, Commander Leon Zhang, who had been with him from the beginning of the war. "How are the civilians in the Volante systems reacting to our presence?" Zhang hesitated, her brow furrowing. "There's been a noticeable shift in the species we've encountered. The smaller ones, the ones who've lived under Volante rule for centuries, are starting to approach us. Some are offering assistance, asking for protection against the Dominion. Word is spreading fast that we're different. We're not conquerors." Chenowin nodded, his mind calculating. "Keep them informed. Tell them that we are not here to destroy, but to stop what happened to us from happening to them. We will not be the Volante. We will not become what we hate." On the fleet's communications network, a message was transmitted to all ships. It was simple but clear, carrying the weight of their mission. "Today, we fight for 12 million souls. We fight for every species the Volante has ever wronged, and we fight to make sure no one ever suffers as we have. We are humanity, and we do not forget." As the message echoed through the fleet, a powerful silence fell over the ships. The crew members, most of them veterans of the long years of preparation, understood the gravity of their task. They were not just fighting for vengeance, they were fighting for justice. They were fighting to ensure that the Volante would never again rule the galaxy with the same ruthless disregard for life. But as the human fleet drew closer to the heart of the Volante Dominion, the Volante High Command was already planning its next move. They had underestimated humanity before, but they would not make the same mistake again.
The true battle was just about to begin, and the galaxy would soon learn what happened when the weak were given a voice and the strength to fight back.
The human fleet continued its relentless advance through Volante space, a wall of metal and firepower that stretched across the stars. Each ship in the 500,000-strong armada was a symbol of humanity's resolve, a reminder to the galaxy of what had been lost and what was now being built in the name of justice. Admiral Chenuin, Supreme Commander of the Retribution Fleet, stood on the bridge of the Remembrance, staring out at the endless sea of warships surrounding him. It was a sight he had dreamed of for years, but now, as the reality of their journey set in, there was no sense of triumph, only the burning drive to fulfill a promise. He had vowed to his sister, Sarah, that he would make sure the sacrifice of New Providence would not be forgotten. They had come for justice. In the vast command center of the Remembrance, the atmosphere was tense, each officer focused on their respective duties. For the past decade, they had prepared for this moment, the moment when humanity would take vengeance for 12 million lives lost in an instant. The fleet had traversed countless light years, passing through asteroid fields and navigating gas giants, carefully avoiding detection until they had reached the outskirts of Volante-controlled space. "All ships report ready," said the communications officer, his voice steady but tinged with anticipation. "Good," Chenuin replied, his voice calm but resolute. "Set course for the heart of Volante space. We will reach the Dominion capital within 3 days. Keep the fleet on high alert." The fleet moved in unison, its immense size cutting a swath through the void. Despite the scale of the human armada, the Dominion had not yet taken any action. The Volante, for all their technological might, had hesitated, an opportunity that humanity had been quick to capitalize on. The shock of seeing the human fleet materialize out of nowhere, striking with such coordination and deadly precision, had rattled even the most battle-hardened Volante commanders. And so the humans pressed on, knowing that the time for mercy had passed. They were not here to conquer. They were not here to impose their will on the galaxy. They had come for one reason only, to ensure that what happened to New Providence would never happen again. Chenuin's mind wandered as he stood on the bridge, his eyes scanning the fleet. He thought about Sarah, her final message, the way her voice had echoed through the comms before it was silenced forever. "Tell Earth, tell them everything, and make them pay." He had sworn to carry that message forward, to make sure that the Volante would understand the true cost of their actions. He turned to his second-in-command, Commander Leon Zhang, who had been with him from the beginning of the war. "How are the civilians in the Volante systems reacting to our presence?" Zhang hesitated, her brow furrowing. "There's been a noticeable shift in the species we've encountered. The smaller ones, the ones who've lived under Volante rule for centuries, are starting to approach us. Some are offering assistance, asking for protection against the Dominion. Word is spreading fast that we're different, we're not conquerors." Chenuin nodded, his mind calculating. "Keep them informed. Tell them that we are not here to destroy, but to stop what happened to us from happening to them. We will not be the Volante. We will not become what we hate." On the fleet's communications network, a message was transmitted to all ships. It was simple but clear, carrying the weight of their mission. "Today, we fight for 12 million souls. We fight for every species the Volante has ever wronged, and we fight to make sure no one ever suffers as we have. We are humanity, and we do not forget." As the message echoed through the fleet, a powerful silence fell over the ships. The crew members, most of them veterans of the long years of preparation, understood the gravity of their task. They were not just fighting for vengeance, they were fighting for justice. They were fighting to ensure that the Volante would never again rule the galaxy with the same ruthless disregard for life.
But as the human fleet drew closer to the heart of the Volante Dominion, the Volante High Command was already planning its next move. They had underestimated humanity before, but they would not make the same mistake again. The true battle was just about to begin, and the galaxy would soon learn what happened when the weak were given a voice and the strength to fight back.
As the human fleet pushed deeper into Volante space, the battle around Ivar Prime reached its devastating peak. The Volante's once imposing defense platforms crumbled under the weight of the human assault, each shot fired from the human ships tearing through the Volante's shields like paper. The space surrounding the capital was now filled with debris, the remnants of what had once been the heart of the Volante Dominion. Admiral Cathorum, his confidence shaken for the first time in his long career, stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching as his fleet faltered under the relentless onslaught. The Volante had never faced such coordinated, unyielding force. The human fleet, 500,000 ships, was a living, breathing entity, a testament to humanity's ability to unite, adapt, and fight back. "We cannot hold them," Cathorum muttered, his voice heavy with frustration. His fingers gripped the command chair as the tactical display flickered with red alerts. His second-in-command, standing beside him, offered no words of comfort, only silent acknowledgement of the inevitable. "We must retreat," the officer suggested, his voice low, barely audible over the chaos. "If we do not, we will be destroyed." But Cathorum, however, could not bring himself to admit defeat, not yet. He had purged worlds, eliminated species, and watched empires fall without hesitation. He had never once been forced to retreat, but now, for the first time, he felt the crushing weight of his arrogance. No, he would not retreat. He would not allow it. "Retreat is not an option," Cathorum hissed, his yellow eyes narrowing. "We will stand our ground." But deep down, he knew the truth. The Volante were no match for the human force. Their ships were larger, more powerful, and they fought with an unrelenting fury that the Volante could not match. At that moment, a voice crackled through the communications system, sharp and urgent. "Admiral Cathorum," the voice said, "the human fleet is breaking through. Their ships are now within range of the capital defenses. We cannot hold them much longer." Cathorum stood silently, his heart pounding in his chest. He looked around the bridge, seeing the faces of his officers. They were all silently waiting for him to give the order, an order to either fight until the end or surrender to the inevitable. "Prepare the fleet for a final assault," Cathorum ordered, his voice cold. "We will fight until the last ship falls." The Volante fleet, now in full retreat, began to regroup for one last desperate push. But it was clear this was not a battle they could win. The human fleet, though smaller in numbers, had already outsmarted and outgunned them. Every Volante ship, no matter how powerful, was now just a target for humanity's wrath. Above Ivar Prime, the battle continued to rage. Plasma bolts flew in all directions, tearing apart Volante ships, disintegrating them in moments. The human warships, though battered, kept moving forward with calculated precision. It was as if they knew there was no turning back. This was the final stage of the war, not for conquest, but for justice. As the Volante capital's defenses faltered, the High Hegemon, her face a mask of defeat, stood in the command chamber, staring at the view screen. The human fleet was closing in. She had known this day would come, the day when the price of their empire's cruelty would finally be collected. Cathorum, along with what remained of the Volante fleet, pushed forward, determined to die with his honor intact. But even he knew the fight was futile. "Are we truly going to destroy our home?" the High Hegemon asked quietly.
her voice filled with a bitter resignation. Cathorum turned to her, his expression unreadable. If necessary. The final moments of the Volante Dominion were unfolding before their eyes. It was no longer a matter of military strategy. This was a reckoning. A species that spent thousands of years dominating the galaxy, destroying all who stood in their way, was about to be undone by the very force they had sought to eliminate, the humans. The human fleet, though battered, was unyielding. One by one, the Volante ships fell, their massive hulls torn apart, their crews sent to the void. The survivors of the Volante fleet, now scattered and broken, made one last attempt to regroup, but it was too late. Admiral Chenowin stood on the bridge of the Remembrance, his eyes locked on the view screen as Ivar Prime came into view. The capital was surrounded by the wreckage of Volante ships, the once glorious city now shrouded in the smoke and fire of war. He had kept his promise. The humans had fought not just for vengeance, but for justice, for the memory of New Providence and its 12 million lost souls. "We've done it," Commander Zhang said, her voice low but filled with respect. Chenowin nodded slowly, his face hard with the weight of what had been achieved. No, not yet. The final victory was not about the destruction of the Volante. It was about ensuring that no other species would ever suffer as they had. Humanity had not just won a war, they had sent a message to the galaxy. The time of oppression was over. The time of justice had arrived. Ivar Prime was on the brink of collapse, and the Volante Dominion was crumbling beneath the weight of its own arrogance. Humanity had struck a blow that would echo through the galaxy. But what would the future hold for the Volante and for the rest of the galaxy? Would the humans continue their campaign for justice, or would they turn their gaze elsewhere?
As the human fleet moved closer to Ivar Prime, the Volante capital, the final push to end the Dominion's reign was about to take place. But the war was not yet won, and the time had come for the Volante to face the consequences of their actions. Admiral Chenowin's resolve was unwavering. He had not come this far, fought this hard, just to destroy the Volante and leave their empire in ruins. Humanity had something more to prove. They were here for justice, not for mindless conquest. The destruction of New Providence, the loss of 12 million innocent lives, could not simply be met with annihilation. The Volante had to answer for their crimes. "Prepare the tribunal station," Chenowin ordered, turning away from the view screen. "We're not here to simply end the Volante Dominion. We're here to make sure the galaxy knows what happens when a species crosses the line. These criminals will face judgment." The plan was clear. The remaining Volante fleet had been scattered and broken, their forces in disarray. The Volante High Command, desperate to salvage what little they could, had sent a message requesting a ceasefire. But it wasn't peace they sought, it was time. Time to discuss terms, time to find a way out. But Chenowin's response was clear. No peace until the trial is complete. On the distant outskirts of Volante space, a new station was being built in orbit around a forgotten asteroid. This station would serve as the venue for the trial that would mark the end of the Volante Dominion. The trial wasn't just for the generals or commanders who had ordered the destruction of New Providence. It was for the entire Volante species. It was time for them to reckon with their actions. The human fleet, having completed its mission, formed a blockade around the station. The Volante ships that had once been the pride of the Empire now moved under human supervision, their commanders awaiting their fate. It was a cruel irony, the destroyers of worlds now facing the judgment they had so freely given to others. The trial began in silence. In a neutral chamber aboard the station, the surviving Volante officers, including Admiral Cathorum,
were brought forward to stand trial. Cathoram's once proud demeanor had been broken. His eyes, filled with regret, scanned the faces of the human tribunal. His arrogance had led him here, to this moment of reckoning. Maria Santos, the human prosecutor, stood tall before him. She had lost everything, the lives of her children, her husband, and her home on New Providence. But she was not here for vengeance. No, this was something deeper. She was here for justice. Her voice was calm, but filled with the quiet rage of a mother who had lost everything. On the morning of June 15th, 2347, 40 Volante warships entered orbit above the human colony of New Providence. They did not issue warnings. They did not offer an opportunity for surrender or negotiation. They simply began firing. They killed 12 million innocent civilians in a matter of hours. She paused, the room silent as the full weight of the loss settled in. The Volante officers stood motionless, but Cathoram's expression betrayed the guilt he could no longer hide. Admiral Cathoram, you stand accused of mass murder. You have destroyed a peaceful world without cause. You wiped out an entire colony, knowing full well that there would be no defense. What do you have to say for yourself? Cathoram's voice was cold, but tinged with a reluctant truth. I followed the law of my people. For 30,000 years, the Volante have protected the galaxy by eliminating threats before they can grow. New Providence was a threat, an infant species with the potential to challenge us one day. I did what was necessary to preserve the Dominion. The room remained silent. Santos looked at Cathoram, her gaze hard and unyielding. Your law, she said, is a law of fear, a law that thrives on destruction and annihilation. But there is no justification for what you did. What you call purification, we call murder, and today you will answer for it. The trial continued for weeks. Witness after witness came forward, their testimonies painting a picture of the horrors that had unfolded on New Providence. Sarah Chun's final message played for the court, her desperate plea to Earth, asking for vengeance, for justice. The tribunal heard of the devastation, of the lives lost in an instant, of the families that had been torn apart. The evidence was irrefutable. In the end, the tribunal's decision was unanimous. Admiral Cathoram, you and your officers are found guilty of crimes against humanity. You are sentenced to life in service at the memorial station in orbit around New Providence. You will be forced to maintain the memorial to the 12 million dead for the rest of your lives. You will recite their names, every single one, and remember the price of your actions every day until your final breath. Cathoram stood silently, the weight of his sentence crashing down on him. He had thought his strength and his empire would protect him from accountability. He had believed that the Volante were untouchable. But now, in the face of humanity's resolve, he understood how wrong he had been. The Volante had been sentenced, but the trial wasn't just a punishment. It was a symbol of what the galaxy could become. A galaxy where no species, no matter how powerful, could act with impunity. And humanity, having suffered the worst, had shown that justice could be achieved, even against the most oppressive forces.
The trial of Admiral Cathoram and the other Volante officers had sent shockwaves throughout the galaxy. The Volante Dominion, once feared and respected as the dominant power in the region, had been humbled. For the first time in its long history, the Empire had been forced to answer for its actions, not with force, but with accountability. The galaxy had witnessed humanity's resolve and their unwavering commitment to justice. But while the trial was over, humanity's mission was far from complete. The Volante Dominion was in ruins,
but the effects of their long reign were still felt across the stars. For centuries, the Volante had dominated, exploiting weaker species, enforcing their cruel policy of purification, and leaving a trail of destruction in their wake. The memory of New Providence's fall was fresh in every mind, but now humanity had an opportunity to reshape the future of the galaxy. Humanity had been scarred, but they were not broken. The people of Earth had united, casting aside old divisions to face a common enemy, and in the aftermath of the war, they were determined to ensure that no other species would suffer the same fate that they had. Admiral Shinuan, having led the fleet to victory and participated in the trial, now stood on the bridge of the remembrance once more. The human fleet was scattered across the galaxy, performing peacekeeping operations, ensuring that no one else would rise to threaten the fragile peace that had been established. There was still much to be done. "We've won," Shinuan said quietly, his voice heavy with the weight of the responsibility that lay ahead. Commander Lian Zhang, ever by his side, nodded but did not smile. "Yes, but the real work is just beginning. The Dominion's old allies, the species they enslaved and oppressed, are looking to us now. They see what we've done, and they want to rebuild. The galaxy is watching us." "We can't afford to let them down," Shinuan replied, turning to face the stars beyond. "We need to be the protectors now. No more empires, no more purifications. The galaxy needs a new way forward." As the fleet moved through Volante space, humanity's influence spread. The species that had once been subjugated by the Dominion, those who had lived in fear for millennia, now turned to Earth for protection and guidance. It wasn't a call for domination, but for assistance, and humanity, having been on the receiving end of such oppression, was determined to help. On the former Volante capital, Ivar Prime, a new council was established, a coalition of species, human and alien, who would work together to ensure that the mistakes of the past were not repeated. For the first time in galactic history, species of all backgrounds, some once oppressed, others once conquerors, came together with a common goal: peace. Dr. Yuki Tanaka, one of humanity's leading scientists and weapons experts, was now working alongside other species to reverse the damage the Volante had caused. With her knowledge of the Volante technology, humanity had not only destroyed their empire, but had also begun to help rebuild what the Volante had torn down. Tanaka's work in energy production, shield technology, and sustainable systems had become the foundation for this new galactic effort. At the same time, humanity was ensuring that the Volante would never forget what they had done. The memorial station, which orbited New Providence, was now a permanent fixture in the galaxy, a reminder of the lives lost and the justice that had been served. The Volante officers who had been sentenced to maintain the memorial continued their work, reciting the names of the 12 million dead every day, as they had been ordered. Their once impregnable empire was now reduced to a mere memory, and their leaders were forced to atone for the horrors they had inflicted. However, the Volante were not entirely abandoned. Humanity's message was clear: you will be held accountable, but you will also have the chance to change. Many Volante, particularly those from younger generations, began to question the Empire's old ways. Some defected to join the rebuilding efforts, working alongside other species to forge a new future. They had seen firsthand what the galaxy could be like when strength was used for protection, not destruction. But not all Volante accepted the new order. Some still clung to the old ways, refusing to let go of the belief that their empire was superior. It was these factions that remained the most dangerous. The struggle for the soul of the Volante people was just beginning. Meanwhile, on Earth, President General Marcus Webb addressed the united governments of the former human nations. It was a new day for humanity, one where they would not only protect their own, but also ensure the galaxy could live without fear. "We have shown the galaxy that we will not be oppressed. We have shown that strength can be used for protection, not for conquer. But our work is far from finished. The power we now wield is not just for us, it is for all those who cannot defend themselves. We will be the protectors of the weak, the guardians of peace. Our job is to ensure that no species ever has to suffer what we have suffered. The galaxy was on the cusp of transformation. No longer would it be a place of fear and domination, but one of cooperation, mutual respect, and justice. Humanity's war for revenge had turned into a war for peace. The battles fought had not just been for survival, but for the right to live without the constant threat of annihilation. They had proven that even the strongest empire could fall, and in its ashes, a better galaxy could rise. The Volante Dominion was no more, but the work of rebuilding and protecting the galaxy had only begun. Humanity's legacy would not be one of vengeance, but of hope. The question now was, would the galaxy choose peace, or would the shadows of the past return to threaten them once again?
50 years had passed since humanity's victorious stand against the Volante Dominion. The scars of war still marked the galaxy, but so too did the seeds of a new future. The actions of one species, humanity, had altered the course of galactic history, and now the question was no longer about survival or vengeance. The question was about how the galaxy would move forward. The once feared Volante Dominion was no more. The remnants of its power were scattered, its territories now controlled by the very species it had once oppressed. The old Volante elites had either been imprisoned or sentenced to life service in the memorial station that orbited New Providence. Those who had survived and defected, often from younger generations, now worked to build a new future, one free from the cycles of fear and destruction that had defined the Dominion for thousands of years. At the heart of the new order stood humanity. Earth had transformed itself into the center of a galactic peacekeeping effort, offering protection, resources, and guidance to the species that had once cowered beneath Volante rule. The human fleet, once a tool of vengeance, was now a symbol of hope. The 500,000 warships that had decimated the Volante fleet had not been disbanded. Instead, they had become the Terran peacekeeping force, a force dedicated to preventing future conflicts, helping rebuild war-torn civilizations, and ensuring that no species, no matter how weak or young, would ever face annihilation. Shenyuan, now an older man with a lifetime of experiences etched into his face, stood at the center of the human fleet once again, this time as the leader of the peacekeeping forces. Though he had fulfilled his promise of justice, he had not found satisfaction in vengeance. Instead, he had found something much harder: hope. In his office aboard the Remembrance, Shenyuan sat silently, staring out at the endless stars. It had been years since the last battle, and yet the weight of the galaxy's future still pressed heavily on him. The memories of New Providence, the people who had died, the families torn apart, still haunted him. He couldn't erase those images from his mind, but he had seen the changes that had begun to unfold, the new opportunities for cooperation and peace that had emerged in the wake of the Volante's fall. The galaxy was healing, but it was a slow process. Many species had accepted humanity's leadership, seeing it as a beacon of hope. Others, especially those once under Volante rule, looked to humanity for protection and guidance, hoping for the promise of a new beginning. Some, however, still resisted. There were factions, even on Earth, who believed that the galaxy's scars ran too deep for true unity, and that humanity's role should be to dominate, not protect. "How do you feel about the future?" asked Lian Zhang, who had remained by Shenyuan's side throughout the years of rebuilding. She had been a pillar of strength, a sharp strategist, and a friend. Her presence in the peacekeeping force
had helped to ensure that humanity did not stray from its path. Shenyuan turned to her, his face grim but resolute. I feel responsible. We've taken on a burden we weren't prepared for. This peace isn't something we can impose. It's something we have to nurture, slowly, carefully. We can't repeat the Volante's mistakes. If we do, we'll become what we fought against. Jiang nodded. You've always believed that, and it's why we've come this far. We still don't know what lies ahead, Shenyuan said, his voice tinged with a weariness he hadn't felt before. There are still Volante factions who want to return to the old ways. There are still species who think they can rule with fear, and there are still those who don't trust us. We have a long way to go before this galaxy is truly at peace. Despite the challenges, Shenyuan had seen progress. The first treaty with the Kree, an ancient species nearly wiped out by the Volante, had been signed, allowing them to rebuild their civilization. The Mundi, another oppressed species, had been freed from their millennia of forced labor. Their mining operations were now restored, and their people had been given the right to live in peace, choosing their path forward. On Evar Prime, the new council, made up of species from across the galaxy, had been established. Human diplomats worked alongside representatives from species that had once been considered enemies, including the Volante defectors. For the first time in history, a galaxy-wide forum for cooperation and mutual respect was being built, a place where decisions could be made together, where peace could be forged, and where the mistakes of the past would never be repeated. Back on Earth, President General Marcus Webb, now an elder statesman, continued to guide humanity's direction, emphasizing the importance of justice, collaboration, and understanding. His leadership had transformed the human race from a fractured species into the architects of a new galactic order. The work isn't over, Webb said during a speech to the people of Earth. We have shown the galaxy that we will fight for what is right, but our true strength lies not in our ability to fight, but in our willingness to protect, to lift others up, and to ensure that no one ever has to endure what we have. This is our legacy. This is what we must leave behind. As the sun set over Earth's landscape, casting a warm golden hue across the planet, Shenyuan felt a sense of peace, though fleeting. The galaxy was no longer a place of endless war. It was a place of healing, of rebuilding, and perhaps, just perhaps, it was a place where true justice could be found. Humanity had shown the galaxy that even in the face of unimaginable loss, there could be redemption, that strength could be wielded for protection, not destruction, and that the future, while uncertain, was one they would build together. The war was over. The Volante Dominion had fallen, but the real work was only just beginning. A new galaxy was being built, one where the lessons of the past would guide the future. A galaxy where humanity had not just survived, but had become the guardians of peace and justice. But would this new order endure, or would new threats emerge to challenge it? May this message strengthen your faith and renew your hope. Thank you for staying until the end. If this touched your heart, like, share, and subscribe to Astro Realms for more uplifting content. May God's blessings overflow in your life. See you soon.